Welcome everyone to our Packers News post-game live chat alongside Ryan Wood. I am Olivia Reiner. The Packers just barely squeezed one by the Jacksonville Jaguars today, pulling off a win 24-20. We'll bring you the latest on the game, we'll wrap it up, plus we'll also take a look at left tackle David Bakhtiari's contract extension. Before we get into that, as always, you can be a part of our conversation. If you are over on Facebook, Periscope, or YouTube, leave us a question down in the chat. Ryan and I will get to some of those toward the end of our conversation today. The Packers defense has struggled mightily to get after the quarterback this season. They've only had 17 sacks all season, which puts them in the bottom half of the NFL to date. However, the Packers were finally able to get some production out of outside linebackers Rashawn Gary and Preston Smith. They had consecutive sacks on the Jaguars' final possession, which ultimately sealed the deal for the Packers. Why have the Packers defense struggled to come up with a game-saving stop until now?
Until now, they have not had any depth at all in their pass rush. It's been a one-man band. Zary Smith got his 8th sack today on a third down stop. And at that point, those 8 sacks, second closest on the team was Kingsley Keke with 2 at that point. Kingsley Keke got those 2 sacks in the same game in week 3. It'd been a minute. So you got to have depth in pass rush. It's really important that you come at a good pass rush comes at the quarterback in waves and waves and waves. It's not a one-man band, and that's what this team had been until Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary stepped up and they contributed with the pass rush. And that's what this team has been sorely lacking. It's kind of crazy with the Packers defense, Olivia. It's giving up fewer yards than a year ago. There's just nowhere near the amount of big plays. Kenny Clark talked about it before the game this week that they need to get back to where the quarterback is terrorized more often than not. And you saw at the end of the game, they were finally getting after Jake Luton. And it went a long way the defense only gave up 13 points today. 7 of those points were on a punt return touchdown. Played pretty well today, one of their better games. Now it was against the Jaguars. But there's no question the Packers needed the defense to step up today, and they were able to do that.
The Packers could have easily succumbed to the chaos of today's game. Wide receiver Davante Adams had a fumble. It was his first since last season. Quarterback Aaron Rodgers threw an interception, his third of only this season. Plus, the Jaguars had a 91-yard punt return for a touchdown. Why were the Packers able to stay in this one?
Because the Jaguars are terrible. So it was a really weird dichotomy today. Because after the game, obviously the big news today is David Bakhtiari. And there was really some giddiness, but not just David Bakhtiari, what human being in his shoes wouldn't be giddy, right? That's a lot of money that he agreed to and got last night. But even, quarterback Aaron Rodgers, he was giddy for his buddy. And again, that's just being a good friend. What good friend would not be giddy? And then you clicked on Matt LaFleur's Zoom call, and it was like all is lost. The world is old. It was just a completely different vibe. Matt LaFleur very much still focused on the game. And, they played really bad today. And the only reason that they won this game is because the Jaguars are terrible. They're a terrible football team, maybe the worst in the NFL. If not for that, the Packers are not a terrible team, but they played terrible. Jaguars are terrible. Packers played terrible. That's what happens. And if it was just that on its face, maybe it'd be easier to move on because the Packers played like they knew that they could sleepwalk today and win, and they sleptwalk today and won. They played like they knew that. But this is the second straight time at home that they played really lethargic, lacking energy. Football is a game of passion. You got to bring that intensity. They didn't have it today. They didn't have it 2 weeks ago against the Minnesota Vikings. They lost that game because the Vikings aren't as bad as the Jaguars. But it was a very similar performance, and when it happens multiple times, that's a trend. So as exciting as the news was today for this team that they've locked up their franchise left tackle, there was also what happened on the field. And what happened on the field was very far from exciting. It was lukewarm, lethargic, and just it didn't inspire a lot of warm, happy feelings with the head coach.
Wide receiver Marquez Valdes-Scantling saved the game for this team. He had 4 receptions, 149 yards, and a touchdown. That yardage, 149 yards, is a career high for him. Valdes-Scantling has been wildly inconsistent this season. Week 7 against the Houston Texans, he was targeted 4 times, didn't have a single catch. Week 1 against the Minnesota Vikings, he had almost 100 receiving yards plus a touchdown. How can the Packers see more consistency out of Valdes-Scantling?
Well, they're seeing it these last 2 weeks. This might be just who he is, Olivia. And when he's good, he's really good. The Packers have been almost stubborn in their support and their patience with Marquez Valdes-Scantling, but he's showing you now why that's been the case, why he's warranted that level of grace, because when he's good, he's big play machine is what he is. The second straight game that he's had a 50-yard touchdown. His third touchdown of at least 45 yards this season. They've played 9 games. He's had at least one 40-yard catch in 4 of them. At his best, he's a big play machine. He's a rare combination of size and speed. He's always going to have inconsistent hands, which is probably why what made this maybe his best game of his career day, not just those career high yardage. He didn't have a drop. He didn't have the bad drop today. He caught what was thrown to him. He was consistent, and that's what they've needed from him, because they got the big plays. They know that they have that. It's the easy plays that they've got to have him make as well. He made those today when he was open. He got the ball. And if he can build on that, Allen Lazard likely coming back in this week, there's more depth. There's not a lot of depth in this receiving corps, but there's more depth than they had a year ago. Extremely historic low bar that they set a year ago for receiving depth. The question going forward, question we don't know yet, of course, is whether it's going to be enough depth over the long haul.
Let's shift gears to the massive news dump that came in the middle of the game today. Left tackle David Bakhtiari has signed a contract extension for 4 years of over $105.5 million contract extension, making him the highest paid offensive lineman in NFL history. That fact is impressive in its own right. However, it's even more impressive considering the fact that next season, 2021, the salary cap is going to be a minimum of $175 million, far less money than the league was anticipating due to COVID-19. How important is Bakhtiari to the Packers' success in the future?
Well, he's an all-pro. He's one of the most talented players in the league. He plays one of the most important positions in football as a left tackle. And, oh, yeah, by the way, he only just turned 29 in September. So, yeah, he's a foundational piece. And the deal makes him the most expensive, the highest paid offensive lineman in NFL history. But never mind what it costs. The reality is that the Packers could not afford to lose David Bakhtiari in free agency. No championship contender loses a 29-year-old franchise left tackle who might be the best player at his position, at one of the most important positions in the league. You don't lose that guy. You pay that guy what it's required to keep him, and what was required from the start with David Bakhtiari. He made it very clear from the onset that he would not settle for anything other than number one. He would not settle for anything other than the most expensive, the richest contract for any offensive lineman in the history of the league. It was very intentional. He wanted not just an extension. He wanted history. This is a guy who was drafted in the 4th round, who went from that to being a day one starter, who went from the day one starter to seeing him passed over in Pro Bowl selections way too early. There's one, maybe 2 times in his career that he had an All-Pro selection, wasn't a Pro Bowler. So this is a guy who felt slighted coming up. And 4 years ago, he signed a contract extension with the Packers. On the eve, by the way, that 2016 season, fun subplot, they were playing the Jacksonville Jaguars the next day, just like 4 years, just like now. But on the eve of that 16, he signed a deal that put him in the top 5 at his position, but did not make him number one. It was, in a lot of ways, still a team-friendly deal, especially if you look at what he did in the 4 years since. He was done settling. He made it very clear. He wanted the number one, the richest contract for any offensive lineman in NFL history. He was absolutely worth that on his open market value. That's not a guy who's thinking that he's better than what he is. David Bakhtiari is actually that good. He didn't settle, and he got the deal. So kudos to him. And at the end of the day, kudos to the Packers, because they did what was required to keep a guy like that, a foundational piece, on their roster.
Let's continue the conversation about Bakhtiari, the game, whatever else is on your mind, as we start to take some of your questions over on Facebook, Periscope, and YouTube. Thanks, everyone, for joining us tonight. Levi asks over on Facebook, did today hurt running back Aaron Jones' chances of getting a Alvin Kamara or Dalvin Cook type of deal? Ryan, how does David Bakhtiari's extension impact Aaron Jones, who also becomes a free agent in 2021?
It didn't get easier. We know that. And Ryan Gutekunst said that he thinks that structurally and according to our Tom Silverstein, David Bakhtiari's deal includes $30 million in signing bonus. He'll get a $30 million roster bonus in March So there's a lot of upfront money that does help with the proration. It does help with the structure and the cap hits over the course of these 4 years. With that said, even if you get some flexibility, this is a team that a couple years ago signed Aaron Rodgers in 18 to the richest contract in the history of the NFL for any player, any position. In camp, signed Kenny Clark, made him the highest paid nose guard in the history of the league with that $70 million deal. And now they've just made David Bakhtiari the highest paid offensive lineman in the history of the league. In a capped sport like the NFL, you can't continue to give guys the highest paid contracts, such and such at their position. You can't continue to do that one after another after another. At some point, the cap does matter. There's things that they can do. There's some flexibility, not just with how they structured David Bakhtiari's deal, but maybe some cap casualties, maybe something like that. There's stuff that they can do if they want to go out and sign Aaron Jones. There is a lot of room to wiggle around, but it did not get easier. I don't think there's any question that retaining Aaron Jones at a market value got more difficult today.
Let's flip it back to the game. We've got a lot of questions, comments about the Packers' performance today, barely squeaking one out over the Jacksonville Jaguars, 24-20. Owen says, what do you make of the lack of energy from the team? Do you think it's because of the fact that there's no fans in the stadium and it's hard to play without fans, especially in the harsh, windy conditions at Lambeau Field? A lot of comments in the down here say that the Packers are playing soft. This team looks soft. They have no chance next weekend on the road against the Indianapolis Colts. Why is this team coming out flat, especially at home?
It's a great question, and the troubling thing, again, is that this was not a one-off. This was not just a random, fluky type thing. If you thought that this team was going to learn its lessons from losing a game to an inferior Minnesota Vikings opponent 2 weeks ago, then today was really troubling for you because they clearly did it. This was the same group, the same energy level that they put on the field that was unacceptable 2 weeks ago. It was unacceptable today. They just got lucky that they were playing maybe the worst team in the NFL. So, yeah, go back to that dichotomy. There's a lot of giddiness for David Bakhtiari, but Matt LaFleur really, really took it to his team and to himself and to his coaching staff and said that it just wasn't good enough. The energy was not acceptable, and it's hard to figure out why. Matt LaFleur was asked exactly that question. Where is this coming from? Why is this? And his answer was, if he knew, it wouldn't be a problem. If he knew, they would have fixed it 2 weeks ago because this is what they already seen. So the fact that it's a trend now, it's concerning. I don't think there's any question that it's a concern going forward. You know that going to Indianapolis next week against the top team in the AFC South, a really good defensive front. They've got Phillip Rivers, Phillip Rivers can be really up and down, but when the Packers saw Phillip Rivers last season in L.A. when he was with the Chargers still, he beat them pretty good. And they've got a good running game. Packers still don't stop the run. There's a lot of concern going into this week. At the end of the day, a win's a win, but there's a lot of things this team's got to clean up.
Let's go back to our discussion about David Bakhtiari's contract related to that topic. Smumster over on Periscope asks, can the Packers restructure Aaron Rodgers' contract to a more friendly cap number in 2021? If you look at his cap hit in 2021, it goes up substantially next season, over $36 million of a cap hit for him in 2021. And it's also quite big in 2022, $39 million. How likely is it that the Packers would seek to restructure some of their players that have bigger cap hits in order to, A, stay under the salary cap, which again is going to be lower than anticipated, and then also to potentially bring back 2021 free agents like running back Aaron Jones, center Corey Linsley, or perhaps cornerback Kevin King?
Yeah, so this can get really complicated, and I'll try to avoid that. The bottom line is what matters is the proration. And if they wanted to slide more money into guaranteed portions of the contract, then there might be some things that they could do. They're not obligated to. Cap casualties might be a more likely way to go about it. So I wouldn't, at this point, I would look at it more from a macro point of view in what this team can do on the more general big scale than zeroing in on any one position. Because at the end of the day, Aaron Rodgers, if he doesn't want his contract restructured, and again, who doesn't want more guaranteed money? So it's not an issue. But if he doesn't want to do anything, you don't have to. So it's going to be interesting to see how they go about it.
Antwine says that, related to our conversation today about 2021 free agents, Cornerback Kevin King must go. Kevin King has missed the last 5 games with a quad injury. He becomes a free agent in 2021. How does his injury history impact the Packers' interest in him going forward?
I think it's funny in some ways. All the talk about how the Packers defense has been bad, not unjust, not unfair. It was, I thought, okay today. I thought it played pretty well today. It kind of went out there and won a game for him, but on a whole, these last few weeks, it's not been great. And then you juxtapose that with Kevin King not playing, and he must go. This defense is not as good without Kevin King. This defense also is not as good without Jair Alexander. Today, the fact that they didn't have either of their top 2 corners didn't help. It didn't help. And it'll be interesting because the longer Kevin King is not playing, he's losing money. This is a player who has a red flag with his injury history. He's also very talented and has been a productive player when healthy. The longer he misses, the more that's going to hurt his market value. Does that make him more affordable for the Packers? Because there's no question, and you can get it frustrated with his injury history all you want, but there's no question that he's talented, and when he's on the field, he's productive. He's not the top cornerback in the league, but he's a very good corner. He's a corner that winning teams can put on the field, and he's a corner that this Packers team, if it can reach a deal, is going to want to retain. So in some ways, that this injury might be helping the Packers keep him more than it's helping Kevin King, certainly with his market value.
Owen has a question that looks even further down the road. We've been so focused on 2021 because the Packers have quite a few free agents in 2021. However, Jair Alexander becomes a free agent in 2022. How likely is it the Packers would want to try to lock him down before he hits the market then?
I mean, that's way out in the future, obviously, but it's certainly, that he's the type of guy that is homegrown and you'd want to keep. Where his market value will be, it's too early to say. A big reason being that cornerbacks are usually paid on interceptions, and Jair Alexander doesn't have very many. So if that part of his game comes along and he starts making more big plays, his market value could go through the roof because he doesn't give up a lot. His coverage ability is unquestioned. It's just a matter of whether he can take that next step in his career, and there's a lot of time to figure that out.
No one wants to talk about the Jags game today. It was that underwhelming, I suppose. Everyone is fixated on the free agents. Zach wants to know, between running backs Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams, who are both free agents in 2021, which one has the best chance of returning next year, Ryan?
It's a good question because Jamal Williams is a really good player. He's not dynamic, but he's a really good player. He won't get the same contract on the open market as Aaron Jones. I can see a scenario in which they pivot and they try to keep Jamal Williams with A.J. Dillon. Now, they're losing something there, and this team is completely different. This offense is different when Aaron Jones is on the field. He's that type of a dynamic talent. So it's a tough decision. Ultimately, Brian Gutekunst and Russ Ball know a whole lot better than what we do right now, what their plans are in terms of maybe restructuring, maybe saving some cap money with a release here or release there, if they're planning to demand a pay cut from somebody. What we know is that there's a lot of things that they can do. What we don't know is what they're going to do.
Thank you, Zach, for your question. It's going to be an offseason unlike anything we've ever seen before because of the salary cap. We don't exactly know what that number is going to be just yet. However, when we do, it'll be interesting to see how the Packers stay underneath of it. That is going to do it for us tonight, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be back later this week to get you set for the Packers road game against the Indianapolis Colts. For Ryan Wood, I am Olivia Reiner. We'll see you next time.